Okay, what's up? I just woke up, so if I'm looking a bit haggard, that's because of the current time in the morning, a little bit after 8. So, let's get started with JFAQ7. JFAQ7 starts with Zoe asking, what is your opinion about gaijin gyarus in Japan? If you don't know what the gyaru subculture is, it's a subculture of girls who wear a certain type of makeup that would be called para makeup or the tenuki makeup, which is kind of like, sometimes they have the kind of very white eyes. Sometimes it's more subtle, like for example, Gyaru Sone, who is a famous competitive eater. She has very subtle makeup with her whole gyaru getup. My personal opinion is I really feel like as far as fashion, everybody should get to do what they want. I don't think you should really harp on anybody's style or fashion. What they feel most comfortable with and what they get excited about, you should just leave alone and respect, even if you personally think it's totally ridiculous. Because I'm sure there's been times in my past where certain styles I've had look totally ridiculous. But a gyaru, I think if it's done in a subtle way, doesn't really look too bad. It actually looks kind of cute. Like, for example, like I said, Gyaru Sone, or there's that famous gyaru who started that manga. And if it's done in a subtle way, it's okay. But if you get into like the Yamaba type girl where they have like, super raccoon eyes, it's a little bit creepy, a little bit too over the top for me. Ramsey asks, is it true that you have to pay a crazy amount of yen in order just to park your car in a city like Osaka? Yes and no. You can search around for a pretty decent parking space, but you've got to remember, it is bottleneck traffic here, and there's not a lot of space as far as land. And on top of that, you've got, multi-level parking garages, but even those can cost quite a bit. Even on top of that, if you even buy a car in Osaka, I know at least Osaka, I don't know about Tokyo. If you buy a car here, you have to prove that you have a permanent parking space for that car, or you cannot purchase one. So it is kind of really important to be able to manage where and how you're going to park your car. Jenna asks, are there many conventions in Japan for cosplaying? Yes, of course. And meeting voice actors like there are in the UK and the US. Yeah, of course, we've got tons of them. Mostly in Tokyo, not as many in Osaka, but yeah, of course. Adrian asks, how safe are roads for bicycles? Mostly, like we've talked about, people ride on the sidewalk in Osaka. I was recently informed by a lot of people from other prefectures that they also ride bikes on the sidewalk in their prefectures too. So for the most part, it's pretty safe. What I'd say it's more dangerous for is pedestrians. Have you seen any people on unicycles in Osaka? Like, riding to work on a unicycle? That would be really cute. There are unicycles at elementary schools. Kids do sometimes take unicycle class, and unicycle is something that they train on for, like, an extracurricular activity. So, unicycle is not that unheard of in Japan. Roger asks, how does the Osakan dialect, I think you mean Kansai Ben, affect your Japanese? I'd say how it affected, it's more past tense at this point, is when I first came here, everything I studied didn't make any sense because it had a different ending here in Osaka. For example, instead of wakarimasen or wakaranai, they would say wakarahen. And that made it very difficult when I first got here. Now that I speak Kansai dialect, I find the other way it affects me is that other Japanese people who hear me talk to them are really surprised that I'm using Kansai dialect, because it'd be like, like a Japanese person going to America and having a New York accent. People would be like, wait, what? Andrew said, in the future, do you have any thought of returning to America, or has Japan won your affection? Yeah, as for right now, I don't have any plans to ever come back to America. I'll visit, but I don't ever want to move back. And if you would like to return to America, is there anything in Japan that has made you decide this? No, not really at all. Bad experiences, culture shock, whatever. No, not even the Fukushima earthquake made me want to go back. Nothing. Maggie says, from Facebook JFAQ6, you have your retirement pretty much planned out. I talked about how I would retire to Malaysia. Have you always been so prepared? Pretty much. I knew I would retire to a country that was not America, but also not Japan, because Japan is too expensive to retire in. What's your backup plan? Well, obviously I would go to another cheap Asian country, possibly the Philippines. Give tips as to how to plan your life. Just always have a backup plan like you've just talked about here. Have an A, B, and C plan. Question 2. Is it true that female is still pretty much the inferior sex in Japan? Yes and no. Slowly and recently, due to the UN and the G8 conference, women are starting to get more places in higher level corporate situations. Also, our current Prime Minister, as you know, Shinzo Abe, he's actually pushing that. He said he wants to see every single major company in Japan, that's your top companies like Sony, Panasonic, and, et cetera, et cetera. He said he wants to see at least one female at the highest level positions on the board. So that's kind of him pushing for there being no glass ceilings as far as women in the workplace. So, kudos to him for that. I hope Japan continues to become enlightened as to the fact that women are just as equal as men in the workplace, as they can contribute quite a bit to the growth of Japan. I also hope, my hope for Japan is that they start to respect women's rights as far as getting time off for pregnancy and then being able to keep their job, because right now there's a little bit of problem where I think the max you can take off is like 3 months, and if you stay longer than that, then the company's allowed to fire you, which is kind of crap in my opinion. Let's see. Eduardo says, 1, is Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings popular in Japan? You know what? Lord of the Rings is popular here. Game of Thrones is coming here this month, July, and I am really freaking excited, man. I love Game of Thrones, and now I can finally watch it with my wife. Don't tell me anything about what happened. I haven't watched Red Wedding yet. I want to see it, but don't tell me anything. Number 2, is it true most Japanese people don't like reading books? Who says that? Dude, I see people reading on the train all the time, and we have our own version of the Kindle. It's called the Kobo. I've read that books aren't quite popular. I've read that books aren't quite as popular there is in the Occident. As the Occident. Occident. Is this another word I don't know, like busking? If it is, I apologize. 3. You said that you like Gantz and Facebook JFAQ7. Yes, that's true. Have you finished reading it? I haven't finished. I heard the last one came out recently, and I have not read the last few, so please don't tell me anything. Alan says, what is Japan's general attitude toward martial arts nowadays? They're still very passionate about it. I know they used to be very passionate about it. Oh, okay. And have pride about it, but after all the corruption, are they still as passionate? I think what Alan is talking about is recently there's been a lot of corruption in judo. I don't know if you had heard, but a high-level Olympic judo competitor was recently, I don't know if he was thrown in jail, but I know he was at least hit with a lawsuit and fired from his job due to the fact that he sexually harassed one of the women that he was training. And he was pretty much a huge jerk because they found out he had a history of doing that. So I would say that kind of corrupted it in that sense, but it's not any worse off than sumo is right now. And as you know, they've had some sketchy things going on recently too. Drazen, my friend Drazen, some of you may know, he's visited me a few times here. He's giving people information on cosplay. He's not actually asking a question. Drazen. Rick says, you touched upon retirement in previous JFAQ and said you would move to Malaysia, but do you have a 401k? No, I do not. As of right now, I don't have any kind of job I can get in Japan where I can get a 401k. So if that's your hopes, you might want to try and getting a more corporate job, which would be very difficult because you'd have to be speaking native level Japanese. So unfortunately, that's kind of a problem if you're really set on a 401k. Steve says, do you give little tours to people if they come to Japan? I tried it for a little bit, but it's like kind of like patchwork as far as how you fill in a schedule, so it doesn't really lend itself to being able to put aside the time to do it. And really, I would only do it for money at this point because, I mean, I'm so freaking busy. I don't have any time to stop in the middle of my day and show somebody around. You got to remember, I've got 2 kids and a family and a full-time job that goes over 60 hours a week at this point. Rusley says, Scott, what's your guilty pleasure? Music, movies, stuff, anything. Be honest. I like creepypasta. I really like to listen to creepypastas online. If you guys know any like really, really good creepypastas, I've like read all of them. I've watched everything. My all-time favorite creepypasta is probably Squidward's Suicide. I really like that one a lot. And maybe Dead Bart. Dead Bart's pretty good. Steven says, as a musician in the States, I always found it hard to practice guitar or drums, especially when I lived in an apartment. Well, same thing is going to be here in Japan, too. It's going to be really difficult. Considering the walls are much smaller in Japan, how do people practice? People rent studios to practice. They rent very small studio rooms that are meant only for bands to practice, and that's the only way bands can practice here in Japan. There's really no other way. Ramsey asks, when your kids reach the legal age, which I believe is 20 years old in Japan, you are correct, that's a legal adult here, and have to choose between American and Japanese citizenship, they actually have to choose at 18, because in America, a legal adult is 18. Which citizenship would you advise them to keep, and why? They can actually be a dual citizen. If you really want to be a dual citizen, it's easy to do, and Japan is pretty lax on us allowing you to get, your other citizenship if you're a, half. So I'm going to tell them to keep both, because you always got to have a backup plan. What if something goes horribly wrong here in Japan? What if something goes wrong in America? And honestly, as far as where they want to live and what kind of job they want to do, totally up to them. If they want to be totally Japanese, I've even given them a Japanese middle name, and they can even change their name to that if they want to. It has kanji and everything. Charmoil, I hope I said that right. Charmoil says, good day, Scott. In a previous JFAQ, you mentioned that sometimes you help with the cooking. Just wanted to know, what Japanese home cooking meal do you enjoy preparing? There's a tofu and hamburger and rice type meal I really enjoy. I also, do obviously really simple stuff like rice omelet and tamago kake gohan, of course. Anybody can do that. It's like making a bowl of cereal. Nick says, hey Scott, love the vids, keep them up. Anyway, any new anime movies that you're looking forward to seeing this year? I heard Ghibli will be bringing out 2 new movies this summer. What's your thoughts on them? Also, not really a JFAQ related question, but what pens do you use for your artwork? Okay. Yeah, I'm excited about Ghibli movies. At this time, I'm not as big on ones that are not drawn by Miyazaki. If Miyazaki doesn't draw them, I really don't care too much to see them, because I know his son does some of the movies, and maybe this is just due to my, nostalgia that I enjoy the Miyazaki drawn ones, the originals, but I'm not as big on some of the newer stuff that's coming out. Like, I forget, what's the name of that one with the Thumbelina type girl dancing around the yard, and that was a pretty boring movie, comparable to Spirited Away or Howl's Moving Castle. I mean, that was pretty boring in comparison. So I've not been as hyped about the newest ones coming out. As far as new anime movies, there's nothing really in the works right now that I'm that excited about. As for what pens and stuff I use Copic markers to color everything that I do most of the times. If I'm getting really hardcore into it, I get acrylics and oils out. Devin says, 3 small questions. Is Chara still big in Japan as a musical artist? Well, I don't know who Chara is, so maybe not so big. What are your favorite 6 Pokemon? My favorite 6? Okay, let's see if I can do this. I like Throw, I like Sock, I like Tepig. Other ones I like, probably those are the only ones I like, because that's the ones I just plow through the games with. Aside from that, probably the classics like, Charizard, Bulbasaur. I like Oshawott. That one's cool, that new one. And that's about it. I like all the evolutionary forms of Tepig and the Emboar. Alright. If you could help me out, can you suggest what website I could order one of those headbands you wear? They are extremely cool. My headbands are from Uniqlo, and Uniqlo, I think, if I'm correct, has a flagship store in New York. So you might want to check out uniqlo.com. I'm not sure if they have these on sale because it is summer right now, and this is actually more of a winter wear type thing. I just use it to contain my wild hair. Patrick says, do Japanese people prefer gaijin from certain European countries over others? I heard they really like Germans because of the historical connection in World War II, but that could be a stupid internet rumor. I've never heard that. Honestly, the people I think they enjoy talking to and meeting the most are French people. They really like the French language. I think it's beautiful. They think everything from France is super beautiful. It's probably one of the second most popular languages to learn here is French. So, well, I guess it's not the second most popular. I'd say like people like to talk about it the most. Obviously, Chinese and other, Korean language is more popular due to the fact that it's more efficient and can get more done. But people really enjoy all types of French stuff. So maybe France is the most popular. I've never really heard people talk much about Germany, honestly. Okay, this guy has his name written in Korean, and I cannot read Korean, so I'm sorry. I'm aware that not everybody has to know how to read Hangul, so you can just call me Alex. Okay, see, he already knew. Thank you, Alex. I was wondering about a sense of humor in Japan. I've been told during my studies that Japanese don't use sarcasm. That is very true. Be very careful with sarcasm. One of the biggest mistakes I made when I got here. I'm really sarcastic, and it does not help. They tend to treat it as a very low type of humor. I don't know about that. They just don't really use it that much. Most of the shows and comedy acts and gags concentrate on more physical jokes. This is true. What are your observations about humor in Japan? Do Japanese use sarcasm at all in everyday life? They almost never use sarcasm. And if you try to use it, it's not necessarily that they look down upon it, it's that they just don't even get it. And it might just be that your language isn't good enough, which was, sometimes that was the problem for me. It took me a while to develop my language skills. But it also just may be something that they just wouldn't joke about, that they're just kind of like, that's too serious, why would you joke about that? So yeah, be really careful with sarcasm. If you're going to use sarcasm, make sure it's a really, really close friend. Never use it at work. I've made that stupid mistake. Carlos says, hey Scott, what is your experience with banks in Japan? Did you ever have any problems with transferring US dollars to yen? No, never. Would you recommend any banks in all honesty? I find banks are, have pretty good customer service. They'll help you out even if, I remember my first week here, I couldn't speak anything. I couldn't speak any Japanese at all. Like the most I could say was like arigato and konnichiwa and stuff like that. But I went to SMBC and that lady there could speak no English, and somehow she got me through filling out an entire form to start a bank account. She was really nice about it and super patient. So my experience has always been good. The one thing I will say that sucks about Japanese banks is you need to be really careful about when your bank's going to be closed. And by that I mean when the ATM is going to be closed. Like you can't get money out of the ATM. A lot of major holidays, even for like a whole week, such as Golden Week, it might be closed out. So you really need to be careful to make sure you're not left high and dry and can't get any money out of your account, because it's happened to my friends before and that sucks. Dominic asks, hello Scott, huge fan of your videos. Thank you, Dominic. I was wondering, in the same way that certain manga, particularly shonen manga, is becoming more popular in the West, are Western comics such as Batman and Judge Dredd and Walking Dead graphic novels such as Watchmen also popular in Japan? Not so much. They like the movies a lot. They love those movies, and almost all those movies come out here. And even Walking Dead has been translated and put into a series you can rent at Tsutaya. But the comics don't really get popular here. Like I've seen one store in Tokyo one time that sold American comics, and they were still in English. They weren't translated or anything. And they were just kind of sold as like really novelty pieces, and you'd have to pay like way too much for them. Like you'd have to pay like $20 for a tiny little comic or something. And it was more of like just like a collector's item, like, look, here's this book I got, like don't open it or anything. So I would say no, they're not really that popular here. I don't know if it's the reasoning is that like their Western ideas are just too foreign for them, like they don't understand where they're coming from. Or maybe like the constant use of like non-stop guns in our comics and stuff like that. I don't know if that's like too foreign for them, but they've just never really become so super popular here. I think one of the biggest differences too is Japanese people like to read, if they have a series they like to read it almost like, bi-weekly or bi-monthly. I mean, they don't like to like wait a whole bunch of months just to get like the next issue. And when they pump out a comic, man, they pump it out with like tons of pages. There's like at least one a month, and like they're thick little books, man. It's not like in America where you get just like this tiny skinny comic with like a couple like 16 pages and a bunch of ads put in there. There's no ads inside of it, and it's the whole story, and they've get to read it almost like it's a novel. All right, how are Western games thought of in Japan? Do they avoid them? Some Western games are really popular. Ones that people avoid or that are just not sold here, which I find is a little bit strange. Games that deal with Japanese soldiers usually won't be sold here. Like, if you can play as a Japanese soldier or you can shoot Japanese soldiers in the game, like these old like Call of Duty games and stuff like that, they just won't sell it here. I don't know if it's because they don't want you to kill them in the game or they don't want you to reenact what they did in the game. I'm not sure what side they're taking because I've never had a chance to ask people who regulate that. The other type of game, and I think this is a little bit more understandable, especially with the nuclear problems in Japan in the past and now even with Fukushima. Games that involve any kind of nuclear type fallout or problems or nuclear waste, they don't like those type of games. For example, the game Fallout. They completely erased Megaton City from Fallout 1, which made a game that didn't really make much sense, but they sold it here anyway and totally deleted that part of the game. You know what's really not popular here, though? It's understandable. I completely sympathize with the Japanese people with this. Xbox. They hate Xbox. Xbox is not popular here. I don't know if you know anything about like the translating and stuff they did for a lot of like instruction manuals and like hardware and software coding and stuff like that inside of it, but a lot of stuff was just not translated for Japanese people. Like, they just decided, well, Japanese is really hard, so let's not screw with that. And from what I've heard, Xbox One it might not even be sold here. They hate it so much. They already hate it so much. Edward says, I know Japan has pride fighting. I think, what do you mean, K1? But how, oh, no, I'm sorry. Pride, yeah, okay, pride fighting. Not actually being proud, but it's actually called pride fighting. But how popular is MMA in Japan? It's pretty popular, but if you tell them about UFC, not many people have actually heard about that unless they're really, really, really into MMA. Also, what other sports do Japanese people watch besides baseball? Well, I mean, they like their classics. They like golf. They have some famous golfers here. They like wrestling. They're really pissed off that was taken out of the Olympics. They like all the same stuff you do. I mean, maybe the biggest thing that they don't have is they don't have American football. But they love their normal football, their soccer football. I don't know how to declare that it's different. Remington says, hey Scott, your children will be or have already entered the Japanese school system. I know you've worked in the system, but how confident are you in the education they will receive? If kids struggle in school in Japan, is there some special form of tutoring? I am not so worried about my kids as far as their education here, due to the fact, number one, is that usually the environments are pretty safe. Yeah, there is bullying and stuff like that, but I'm not really too worried about my kids getting bullied. I mean, they're already leaps and bounds taller than most of the kids in their classes. On top of that, as far as education, I have them set up to go for a test at one of the highest level elementary schools here in my ward, and it's got a really good reputation. I think what you need to do is review the reputation of the schools in your district to make sure you send them to a good one, because you are right, there is the possibility of sending them to one that would not get a very good education. So I think if that was the case, I would be a little bit worried, but I mean, unless they totally flunk out on their tests and they have to go to like a sub-level elementary school, I might just end up sending them to private instead, which I can go ahead and do and still get a good education. So I'm not really too worried about that. As far as you're addressing, like if kids need special tutoring and stuff like that, there is special tutoring. You can get that. There are actually special jukus, which means cram schools, that help kids learn a little bit. They learn how to learn, is what I'm trying to say. They learn how to learn. They study how to study. Because some kids need those skills. They don't know how to do that on their own. They need to actually learn how to take in the information. David says, is it true in terms of video games, Japan has become more of a handheld market and less of a console market these days? I'd say Japan's always been more handheld. Also, what's the Japanese consensus on PS4 and Xbox One? PS4 is going to win out here in Japan, there's no question. But addressing the handheld thing, you've got to take a look at the environment in which Japanese are in. Some of these people live in places that are called, quote-unquote apartment mansions, and those are one-room apartments, okay? If you've got limited space and you have a choice between a handheld game and a giant Xbox 360, what are you going to choose? All right. On top of that, we're on the move a lot here in Japan. I think maybe people don't understand how like transient we are with our constant movement, moving from our jobs to our next place to coming home, always on the train. Dude, handhelds are great for being on the train. I mean, if you want to pass the time on a long train ride, there is nothing better than a handheld game. I love my DS. Eric says, once you get a job teaching English, how difficult is it to advance? Eric, it is impossible to advance. There are no higher positions. You might get a job at a Youjian, an international school, where maybe you can rise to the head teacher, which might pay like, Ichiman more, which is like $100 more a month. But I hate to tell you, it's a dead-end job. It's a dead-end job with one-year contracts that rarely allow you to continue to survive for many, many years in that. So I advise, getting over here, getting your foot in the door with teaching, but not doing it forever if you want to live here. Crystal says, do you know an underground band called After Tonight? No, I do not. What's the underground band scene like? I really don't know much about underground music these days because I don't have much time to hang out like with that kind of crowd anymore because I'm a dad. Caroline asks, in general, Asian countries are stereotyped as being sexist in the workplace, with South Korea having a particularly bad rep. How sexist is Japan in comparison to the States? I would say Japan is probably about in the 1950s, where America was in the 1950s with how they treat women in the workplace. For example, like when my wife had my kid, she came back after 3 months, taking 3 months off, and they're like, why are you back so quick? And like, why do you want to work after you have a kid? Now you need to be a housewife. And she wasn't exactly happy about that. That's pretty sexist to say. Ian says, which is more the norm in Japan, the Western bed or the traditional floor futon? Floor futon is still more traditional. Richard says, I am planning to go to Japan for a year after I graduate soon and was wondering is around Niju Hachiman yen. That'd be about like $2,800 a month livable. Or is that too low to live on? No, you could easily live on that much. You'd be okay. As long as you're not like in Tokyo. I'd suggest maybe Osaka. You'd be okay still in Tokyo with that amount of money though. Twopak Shakur says, oh no, two, like they've spelled it T-W-O. How's thug life in Japan? Oh boy. Really? How did I add this person? I need to check who I'm adding. Zachary said, hey, just found your channel recently and have been enjoying a backlog of vids. Is ice hockey or ice rinks common in Japan? Not in Osaka. Well, I've been to one ice rink one time in Osaka, down by Osaka-ko. So there's that one, but it's not huge. If not, what other sports are not popular in Japan? What sports are not popular in Japan? I guess American football is not so popular here because there's not really like that kind of body type to play it. Demetrius asks, which is the weirdest country you have met people from in Japan? Probably, it's not weird. It's not weird. I don't want to say it's weird. I met a guy from Romania one time. I was like pretty surprised he was living there from Romania. But there's nothing weird about Romania. I've been to some weird countries. How about I've been to Herzegovina and Medjugorje? Garrett says, first I'd like to say thanks for posting so regularly. The questions are, since you're in Osaka local, do you like takoyaki? Yes. Do you like okonomiyaki? No, I've talked about this before. If so, what is your favorite takoyaki? I just like, just regular takoyaki. I don't like the big fat ball. It's not as tasty to me. I really like Taco King and Dotonbori. Yeah, that's a good one. Dane Soso says, is that really the name? It must be a fake name. I got a question. I have been to Japan and noticed workers in Japan work much longer hours than in America. This is true. I know that you do freelance work, but when you used to be an ESL teacher, how different was the work? You'll never work more than 8 hours. They don't expect you to. Don't worry. They know you're gaijin and they know you're not used to working more than 8 hours. Miki says, do you want to meet up with YouTubers in Osaka? Yeah, we meet up sometimes here at Tins Hall if you're... Tammy says, how was teaching high school students? Were they difficult or harder than other levels? Yeah, the school I taught at was really hard. I taught out at Sakai, and those kids were like man, they were like low-level learners. Like, schools are actually ranked by like how good they are, and they were ranked one of the lowest high schools in that area. And those kids really just weren't interested in learning at all. They were cool with me, and we were friends, and we hung out after class. Like, I'm not saying out of school, but in my office. They'd come hang out and want to talk and chill and ask questions about America and be interested. But I mean, they couldn't study or learn anything. They learned probably zero English while I was there, and it wasn't my teaching, it was their study habits. They just weren't interested. I think they just felt like the system had betrayed them, and they just weren't interested in learning anything. Learning wasn't cool at that school. James asks, have you ever heard of students who have fell in love or develop a crush on a gaijin teacher? Yeah, that's happened. Not for me. Anything in Japan you would avoid for health or well-being? I guess just when you get here, know that when you've come here your first year, your first 2 or 3 months are going to be what I call the honeymoon period, and you're going to feel pretty good and really be enjoying Japan and being like, wow, everything's so wonderful and new, I have so much to learn. And then you're going to hit like 4 or 5 months or 6 months, and that's when you're really going to probably hit the wall and start to be like, oh my god, I live in Japan, like, I can't, maybe you can speak the language already, maybe you studied it in college, but if you can't, you know, you're not going to learn it like in 1 year, you're not going to learn it in like 6 months unless you're some kind of language genius. And you're going to kind of be stuck in a place where maybe a lot of your friends have already returned home because they were either on a tourist visa or didn't want to stay a full year. And you won't be able to talk to locals much either, so it'll be kind of lonely. You'll be kind of a shut-in. You need to break through that wall and go out there, meet new people, be an idiot with the language. Just try to talk as much as you can, even if you sound like a total idiot, and advance your skills, study your books, get to know people, find new places if you want to make it past that first year. You can do it, but I'd say that's one thing that I would warn about your well-being. Like, maybe you're going to hit that wall at 5 or 6 months. That's where I've actually had a lot of people who've moved here write to me and say, like, I'm just feeling totally lost here in Japan. I'm feeling depressed, and I tell them, you know, this is pretty normal. Don't worry. Hey Scott, if Tokyo won the 2020 Olympics, would you support both countries? Oh, like America and Japan. Yeah, I support both. Most times they're not really going up much against each other for a lot of the stuff that they're really good in. Do you think it would help the economy? Yeah, it would definitely help the economy. London 2012 didn't bring much revenue, and they had predicted what I've read from Japanese want to bring in money to help after the tsunami expenses. You know, I really would love the 2020 Olympics to come here, but you know what my honest opinion is? Unless there's some kind of miracle, Japan's kind of already blown it. That one idiot, I forget his name now, I don't remember the politician's name because I'm not big on remembering politician names. They had a meeting for the Olympics, and he said that other countries who like still kill each other, like the Eastern countries who still kill each other and, you know, worship fake gods and stuff like that, they aren't ready to even have Olympics like us really, you know, mature and advanced technological Japanese people. Like, he said that there, and everyone was just like, what are you saying? What are you talking about? It's like horrible. Like, don't look down on other countries just because you want the Olympics. On top of that, then you've got Hashimoto, who said that comfort women during the war were a necessary thing. That didn't help at all. And then you had the guy at G8 recently who told, not G8, at the UN meeting, who told other UN members to shut up about human rights in Japan. He literally like said in English, shut up. So, unless we can get around all those political faux pas that we've had this year, I don't see the Olympics coming here. Oswin says, is it expensive to own and run a convenience store like 7-Eleven? And do you think it requires a truckload of important paperwork to go through? Yeah, you're not going to end up doing that unless you are already like married to a Japanese national and have a bunch of money and want to buy into a chain. If you were really interested in that, you would have researched it yourself. Do you know it's even called Ito Yokodo? It's I Holdings, it's not 7-Eleven. Joseph says, I know it's somewhat answered. Okay, that's an interesting way to say it. I have a quite of money saved up. I'm thinking you're trying to say I have quite a bit of money saved up. People, please check these when you're writing them. It makes it much harder on me. I have quite a bit of money saved up. I have a degree in English. I have a side gig job that gives me passive income. If I moved to Japan, would I still be taxed? Joseph, I don't know what country you're coming from, so I don't know your tax laws in your country. For America, you still need to report your income, but you don't need to pay taxes if you didn't make any money in America for that year. You would still need to pay taxes in Japan too on top of that. In Japan, I mean, in America, you just file it like the 1040EZ form, but you would like file that you made nothing. Tammy said, was it difficult to renovate your apartment? How costly was it? It wasn't very difficult. One thing I will say about Japanese renovators is they move fast, dude. They renovate like you wouldn't believe. Like, you have a house here that was 7 rooms, including the hallway. If you make the hallway a room, it's 7. They did it in like less than a month. Like, it was seriously like 22 days, and they did the whole entire thing. And I'm talking ceilings down to the floor. So it was costly. It was maybe about $50K. Isaac asks, are you Japanese? Isaac, you're so funny. That's a really funny joke, Isaac. Ben says, Scott, you mentioned in your last video about when a body is cremated, the family members can take some of the bones, and I was wondering if there is etiquette when doing this. Yeah, you know what the biggest etiquette is? You've got these urns, right? And you put the bones in the urns, and then you pass it to the next person. Pass it with the chopsticks, never touch it with your hands. Touching like something that has the body of the dead inside is considered like really morbid and grotesque. Adam says, for my last name, oh, his last name is Butler. Sorry, I gotta say it because you're asking, man. Would you use the actual Japanese word for that? Batara, I think. Yeah, you just write it in katakana, man. Every last name is gonna be in katakana if you're Gaijin. Florian says, hey Scott, I've been following you for a while and your videos are always interesting, so here's my question. I'll spend 2 days in Osaka in August and I was curious, what in your opinion should you go see? I just answered that in my last JFAQ. You can go look at it. Jonathan said, Scott, my question is about popularity of MMA in Japan. We've just answered this, guys. Look at your look at the questions asked before you ask a question. I mean, that's like the same question twice in one JFAQ. I've been planning to go to Japan. Oh, I'm sorry, Raven says, I've been planning to go to Japan for many years now, but some things have bugged me. This might be an odd question, but say you're extremely allergic to fish, seafood, or anything that lives in the water. How would you survive not being able to eat anything of that sort? I mean, you can get dishes that are not seafood dishes here. I mean, obviously there's a lot of noodles. Are there any foods for this person, for this type of person that would, obviously there are other foods, but how would this affect a person? I mean, you're going to be really limited with what you can eat. That sucks. I know you've talked about smoking in Japan and how it's fairly common, but you really only mentioned the males who smoke. How are women who smoke looked upon? Not a big deal either. You know, women smoke a lot here too. Is it bad to smoke as a woman, or is it pretty common? It's not that crazy to smoke as a woman here. Final question, what are libraries like in Japan? They're not that different from libraries in America, honestly. Do they have English section? Yeah, some do. Some have an English section, of course. They're huge, they're massive. They've definitely got English sections. You know, probably if you went out to like some Inaka countryside one, they might not have it. Ryan says, question 1, can someone who is studying Japanese go to a Japanese bookstore and find books in English? Yes, you can. For example, can I go to the Japanese bookstore and find Remembering the Kanji? Yeah. Joseph Keenum says, I have another question. I know everyone has talked about needing a degree to get a job in Japan. What about an online degree from University of Kaplan or Phoenix? I mean, as long as it's a legit degree, you should be okay. I don't really know much about those online degrees. I mean, you better make sure it's like totally legit and recognized nationwide. Otherwise, you better have a contingency plan when they find out it's fake. Ryan says, question 2, how often do you find yourself struggling to read a sign because of the kanji? Quite often, because I'm not very good at kanji. Question 3, are there degrees they prefer more than others, such as math or engineering? Now, if you're going to teach English, they don't care what your degree is. All right, Jake says, hey Scott, what is the best way to make friends in Japan? Learn Japanese. Meet some friends who want to meet you halfway as far as learning English and you learning Japanese. Unless you're already fluent in Japanese, and then just go out to your favorite type of areas and start talking to people about your, common subjects. Francesco asks, do Japanese prefer the English dub of Dragon Ball Z No, why would they prefer the English dub of Dragon Ball Z? Why? It's originally in Japanese. Do you know any J person who's... You can just say Japanese person. Do you know any J person who's watched all the series in English? No, I don't know any. And what are their thoughts on it? Honestly, you remember how I said in the past that when we have movies that get sent to Japan and they're dubbed, and the voices that they've decided to use sound totally wacky and don't match? It's pretty much the same thing for when we do their anime. Have you ever watched like the originals and then watched like when they have the English dubbing? The voices are ridiculous. The original voices I feel match a lot better to the type of emotion they were trying to exude with their voice. I feel like sometimes when we've had dubbing take it over, it totally loses that. And that's not just Japan and America switching stuff. I think that goes for almost any country dubbing another voiceover on a movie that they didn't actually act in, or that they didn't actually draw, or that they didn't take part in. I mean, you lose part of the passion when it's been translated. That's why I prefer subtitles. That's just my opinion, though. I mean, you know, that's more of a critique type aspect. I don't have any proof or anything to back that up, but that's my own personal opinion. I know definitely Japanese people do not watch. Why would they watch their own anime dubbed in English? It would sound completely ridiculous to them. Most of them couldn't understand most of the English that's being said anyway, because you'd be surprised how insane they translate stuff. For example, the most recent one was, you know, watched Pokemon episode 25 about Monkey, and they talk about, oh, these jelly donuts are so good, and those jelly donuts were onigiri. Onigiri in English is rice ball. Why did they change it to jelly donuts? I don't know. It doesn't even make sense sometimes how they translate stuff. But the same thing happens in Japan. You get a movie like Die Hard or something, and they're like, holy shit, this fucking place is about to explode, let's get the hell out of here! And then in Japanese it just says, Ikko. You know, let's go. Like, so, I mean, sometimes translation, like the movie says, lost in translation. A lot is lost in translation. I mean, there just isn't that strong of language to copy what Bruce Willis says sometimes. You know, it's, you don't have the word fucking, let's, you know, fucking go and stuff like that. You know, sorry for the harsh language, but I'm just trying to use an example of how translation sometimes doesn't work. That said, that was actually the last question, and that'll end JFAQ7, guys. Good questions. In the future, please check. Make sure you haven't asked again the same duplicate question, because that kind of slows things down for me and makes it a little bit annoying to try and get through every question. Until next time, I'm Scott. This is JFAQ. I'll talk to you later.